Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zobrio University's webinar on introducing the new MIP Cloud. Today we have Kathy Dwyer, a Senior Application Consultant here at Zobrio, to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll go over all questions at the end. Thank you, and I'll now hand it back over to Kathy.
Hey, thank you, Colleen. Good morning, everyone. This is Kathy. We are going to take a brief look at the MIP Cloud, or often referred to as the modern interface. Okay. This happens to be hosted on one of the community brand servers. So I'm going to go out through Google Chrome, and basically the web page is just Abila Online. Okay. What that's going to do is take us to a login page, okay, where we basically put in our credentials, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So you'll have a username, password, as most software does. And initially what it does is this is kind of standard in a hosted environment, is it initially takes us to, if you will, a portal, an initial portal. And what you're looking at here is the top row, as they call them, apps. They're basically in this particular environment that I'm using. The top row represents the applications, if you will, that this particular community has. We're in their evaluation or test database. And the second row is additional modules that are available. And the way this works in the hosted environment is you'll notice in the upper row on the left you've got MIP as well as MIP Cloud. Okay. The first one, just plain MIP, takes you to the classic interface, which a lot of people are obviously currently using, where MIP Cloud, which I'll just go ahead and click on that right now, what that does is it takes us to what they call the modern interface, which is really all the same functionality. The UI, they call it, or the user's interface, or the presentation of the software, it's really new and slick. You know, it has certain fields that might be redundant have been removed, or certain fields only will display if you need them. You know, for instance, if you're in the vendor file and you're not using payments by ACH, it doesn't bother to display those fields until you activate the ACH. I'm logging in here, and forgive me that it's a tad bit slow this morning. We've actually got multiple layers of between the Zoom session back to me and out on a couple of different servers here. So it's a tad bit slow, but it's not typically slow like this once you get in the software. But what you'll find with this modern interface is there is a dashboard component, which I'm not planning to discuss that today, but I will tell you is if you are a community or an individual that deals with dashboards, likes them, there's huge configurability possibilities with this screen. And then what you'll see is more with the classic interface, you'd see things like across the top, things like transactions or activities or reports. And down the left side of the screen, there was your navigator panel. Well, basically with the modern interface, it's off of the left-hand side, which is still a navigator, is you'll see categories for things like transactions. And then within transactions, we're still subcategorizing, if you will, by the application itself, AP versus AR versus budget, and so on. Your operations is almost akin to what you saw under activities. Okay? But as you can see, for the most part, is you're looking at balances. Maybe you consider them balance inquiries. Okay? It's where the import function, the import function is there under general ledger. We've got maintenance, and again, broken out by the application itself. vendors, AR, GL. There's a reporting category here that when I click on it, again, you get the same concept that the system comes standard with templates and of course your custom reports built into the library. They're all here, and same idea as we've got the concept of categories of reports that you drill into. But the presentation is a little bit more modern look and feel, more like the apps that you click on versus drop lists. And then there's the administration where you can set up really some specifics either related to the individual or related to the entire database itself. I'm going to start by going to maintenance and going into the vendor file, because we probably all can understand the concept of the vendor file. And as this is loading, I just wanted to mention, too, is the cloud, the applications, the MIP applications that have been converted to the cloud, it's basically your AP, your GL, AR, applications like payroll and fixed assets. They're ongoing, meaning they haven't completely been segued over into the cloud interface. And it is quite possible that if you can bounce back and forth between the modern or cloud interface back to the classic interface, and it's all reading your same database files. It's just a different presentation on the screen. Okay, but we've kept the grid approach to your vendors in any of your maintenance. The grid approach. As you can kind of see at the top of, to the right of the columns, there's the filtering capability. Okay, so rather than seeing necessarily, a quick search or an extended search that you see in the classic, it's more built right into the grid. So the idea is an easier presentation, less clicks, get you where you're going. Okay. You do have a search up here at the top that you can still use. That's fine. And you can definitely do that. There's links, like here, if I double-click on the vendor ID, what it's going to do is open you up into, again, an entry screen that's broken down into, if you will, not so much tabs, but screens, okay? And let me show you what I mean by that is, at the top of your screen, it's basically, it's a banner to indicate some generic information about the vendor. But as you scroll down the page, a couple of things that are different is we tend to use color coding in the classic to indicate required fields, where with the modern interface, it's the red asterisk to the right of a column or a field name will indicate whether it's required or not. The other thing that's occurring is to the right of most screens, if not all, there's help built right into the screen. So if you add a field and you're questioning, what do I put here? What's the difference perhaps here, the classic one? What's the difference between inactive and discontinued? Nobody likes to necessarily jump into a documentation book and read it, but pertinent short history facts are right here on the screen that talk about the various fields. You can go from vendor details to the address tab. And again, same functionality, but here's another example of a kind of a slick presentation. Is in your classic interface, you're clicking on a button that says, give me a check address or a second PO address. This screen, same concept that you can do the same, but what I'm doing is I'm scrolling down the page. Okay? So I can see everything on the same page where here we can see the main address. Okay? We can add an additional address just by hitting the blue button that says add address, and it lets you add it right there on the fly. As in the classic, you have a payments and discounts. Okay? And again, we're scrolling. There's the discount. And here's what I was mentioning a little bit earlier is if somebody is a vendor and you've activated the ACH payments, once I click on a field, then it extends out or drills in and says, okay, well, if you're going to enable electronic payments, tell me a little something about the vendor. What's their bank account? Do you want to go through pre-note process? So again, a little bit consolidated, and then it will drill in based on how you answer some of the questions. But you'll continue to have things like a tab for accounting codes, which again is optional, but it's the GL code, which is a default GL number that can be overwritten at data entry time, but it's if you do happen to pick a GL number to link to the vendor, it just basically speeds up your data entry. Distribution codes, which is perhaps where you can get more bang for your buck. That's where you can enter in maybe a fixed invoice amount, and the distribution code basically allocates that expense out to more than one account based on perhaps a percentage or a fixed amount or what they call units. But you have lots of links. The blue fields are the ones with the links, or indicating that's the, if you will, the screen that you're on. Again, you've got your help on the screen built in. Right over to the notes field, which anything you need, you can record there. It's like a free-form field. And, of course, attachments. Okay? If you've activated the attachment function in the software, you can simply say blue button, if you will, added attachment, opens up a browser, allows you to browse out and find the attachment and link it to this vendor. Okay? And it's more visible, too, is I think in the old system, I shouldn't say old, in the classic interface, the attachment or the paper clip has like a red check mark to indicate that something has an attachment. And while it's visible, here you can see it just with a scroll as opposed to click and going down and drilling into that entry. Okay. You can always get back to your main grid by up at the top. If I go from the vendor records back to maintain vendors, and I'll tell it not to save any changes I made there, but it's how you can go back and forth from a detail record. Yes, my mistake, answered the question wrong, but it's basically the link, if you will, backs me to here, which is back to the main grid in the vendor file. You can do things like this. In the upper right, you've got that kind of vertical arrows or diagonal arrows where if I click on those, makes my screen bigger. Okay? Doesn't take away, if you will, the navigator panel. It just kind of truncates them with an icon. So the functionality is still there, but let me elongate it again. It just adds more space to your screen so that you can really, depending on your screen and what you're looking to do, sometimes it's easy to have more working space. So that's just one example of a maintenance screen. Now, you also have things like here with transactions. Okay? You can come in here to transactions, and again, the blue headings indicate what, if you will, module you're working in. Taking a look at the invoice screen, just again as an example, what we're looking at here is the top half of the screen is where you identify your session information. Okay. The bottom half of this screen shows sessions that are waiting to be posted. Okay. You can see the status that they're in. So rather than going to two separate screens to see what's out there waiting to be posted, you can see it here. And, of course, your security still is in play to say who can post. It might be read-only, informational, or somebody might be maybe a user that's been granted post rights, so you can post directly from this screen. But the general idea of entering is up here at the top left is session ID, which, again, red asterisk means it's required. You can either enter it here, or right now we know we hit the plus sign on the keyboard. Here you can left-click on the plus sign, and the system goes out and gets us our next sequential session ID. We got our status code. Again, same fields, just different presentation, but the batch to post, batch to suspend. We could do something like this, put in a description of the batch, session. Your session date is intended to be simply the calendar date that you're doing the work, but you do have overwrite abilities by either typing over or hitting your calendar drop-down. Okay. But once you establish that session information on the upper right there, you hit the Start button, and what that's going to do is take you to the document screen. And what happens here with the document screen, and again, forgive me for the little bit of the slowness with this interface or connection, but the way this is working, and again, let me minimize that panel to the right to give us more space on the screen. But what will happen is you'll notice it keeps your session information right at the top. Okay, so you'll be able to see a running total without having to back up from one screen to the next. You still have the ability to copy or reverse or recall memorized documents, but rather than using a series of icons, they're now keywords to activate those functions. The left side of your screen is a running list of the invoices that you're adding to the session. So no longer do you have to go up to the invoice number and hit the drop arrow and sort through a list. They'll be right here on the screen for you. But the way you get rolling here is in the invoice field, you can either enter an invoice or hit a plus sign. And I'll just go ahead and enter a number. Okay. Document date, which essentially is your invoice date. This might be a description of what you're purchasing, like we'll use the classic office supplies. And let's say the amount of the invoice. Down here, you've got your vendors, okay? And we can just basically, we can hit the drop arrow and select from a list. I'm going to go ahead and just pick one at the top, and I don't know, it's probably illogical. Well, maybe not. Buyers printing, office supplies, perhaps. But it's same concept as you're printing, selecting a vendor, okay? There is the due date, which can either be calculated based out of the vendor file on the number of days due if you're offering early payment discount. Okay. The 1099 identification is still there. And then certainly in the lower grid as well is you've got the different fields that you can enter to your GL account and your entry types and so on and so forth. So it's really, and you basically tab from field to field, and it's going to include all the different fields that you currently have. And these columns can be resequenced, and you can drag and drop and present them differently. Okay? And what ends up happening is what I just did is not only is there a screen elongator in the upper right, there's also one down here as I scroll down on the distribution portion. But what happens is same idea, so you're entering the same information, you just simply, the interface is a bit different. Okay. When you save that transaction, it will load it over into the right-hand side. And you can always go back, like if you click, you notice in the upper left where it says Accounts Payable Invoices, when I click on that, it activates, depending on where I am with the transaction. Like in this instance, it's basically, I haven't saved an entry, but if I told it, go ahead and get rid of that session, it takes me back to where I started. So there's a lot more about the navigation of that, but just kind of introduce you to a little bit of the look and feel of the modern interface. Now, from a reporting standpoint, let me kind of just show you this a little bit. And again, let me make my screen a little bit bigger so that you can see the full wording. But with the reports, when I click on the reports, again, it's going to present by application much like it does in the classic interface, but it's, again, not a drop-down, but more of a, if you will, a box or an app. Okay. Let me go ahead and pick on lists for a moment, because what you'll see is once you select, if you will, a category, then it's going to show you, if you will, an app or a box that you can click on for whether it's a standard report that comes out of the system or whether it's a custom report that you've added to the library. Okay. And what you do is you just simply click on it. Okay. The system will open up in this sense, in that you can basically go ahead and select under this subcategory if I wanted a segment, accounts by segment, or GL segment name, either one of these two reports. You know that there's system template simply because it says last saved by and it says system default. Okay. So what I can do is if I hit the view button, it's going to bring that report right up on the screen here. And again, don't let the speed of our connection here influence your opinion of the software. It's I'm out on my laptop to a server out through the Zoom session, so there's a lot of hops slowing it down a little bit. But I think what I really like in particular about this is how many times have you run a report and perhaps you're looking for something specific. In the classic, you can go to the next page and jump through, but it doesn't have this search box up at the top here. Okay, but what I like about that is the idea that you have the search right here within the report that's displaying on the screen, and in particular, it saves me a few steps. Oftentimes, I find myself exporting a report to Excel and using the search function in Excel. And the good news, yes, I'm just clicking. I'm not digging a hole. I'm clicking a mouse. But isn't it a little bit more efficient to have a search capability here directly in the report? You have in the upper right, you can close the report, or you still have the export capabilities, same function that you currently have. You can certainly close out, takes you back here to this level. And you just navigate. There's not necessarily have to close at this level. At the top line where it says reports, lists, chart of accounts, if I want to go back to the category lists, I just click on it. It takes me back. If I want to go back to the prior level reports, I click on it. It takes me back. So the navigation is different. The presentation of the data is pretty slick, and you really get a feel for that as you're playing around in the software. But it's again, this is the advanced, if you will, or as you hear me say, modern. This is where a lot of the programming efforts are going towards, is this cloud interface. It can basically, a lot of clients host it on either. We can do it here on our Zobrio databases or on the community brands who are the publishers of the software on one of their servers. That is obviously with all the applications, is the cloud is where the future is currently and going. But that, again, quick look at the modern interface. And if you folks have any questions or would like to look at it in more detail, we'd be happy to set up an appointment and show you some more detail of the system. But for now, that's where we are. And I wanted to thank you guys for attending.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. A recording of this webinar will be made available shortly.
Take care, everyone.